Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something pretty controversial.
Yeah.
President Trump's recent executive order to declassify all these documents related to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, wow.
We've got a lot of sources to go through.
Yeah.
Newspaper articles from the Washington Post and the Times, some declassified CIA documents, and we even got our hands on some historical FBI records.
It's like opening up a Pandora's box.
It really is.
Yeah.
So much potential here. I mean, just thinking about the timing of this, the FBI's reputation is already kind of shaky,
Yeah.
especially with all this talk about mass firings of agents who were involved in all these Trump-related investigations.
It's a really interesting time to do this,
It is. It is.
What do you think this means for the FBI right now?
Well, I mean, that's what we're here to find out, right? I mean, will these files just confirm what a lot of people already suspect about how the FBI treated MLK, or could there be some huge bombshells in here that nobody's expecting?
I guess we'll have to see. But I think before we get into all that, it's important to set the scene a little bit,
Sure. First,
understand what was going on back then.
All right, so let's rewind the clock back to April 1968.
Okay.
I'm looking at the source from ReadWorks here, and it says that MLK was in Memphis supporting a sanitation workers' strike, and the night before he died, he gave that incredibly powerful speech. "I've been to the mountaintop." Have you ever read that one?
Oh, yeah. It's really something.
It's amazing.
It almost feels prophetic in hindsight.
Yeah.
Given what happened the next day. And it's important to remember the context here, This was a really intense time. The civil rights movement was facing some internal divisions. Younger activists were starting to question whether King's nonviolent approach was really working.
Oh, yeah, the rise of the Black Power movement, right?
Exactly. Groups like the Black Panther Party were gaining a lot of traction. They were advocating for a more militant form of resistance. They felt like peaceful protests weren't getting the job done.
So King was kind of caught in the middle.
Yeah. He was trying to hold on to his vision of peaceful change, but there was this growing push for a more confrontational strategy. And then on April 4th, he was shot and killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel.
By James Earl Ray, right?
Right, a small-time criminal who confessed to the crime, but then later recanted his confession.
And there is still a lot of people out there, including Coretta Scott King, who believe there was a conspiracy involved.
It's a complicated story, for sure.
It is. And to make things even more complicated, we have to consider the role that the FBI played in all of this.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
This is where things start to get really disturbing.
There's a really great article in the Times by Ben McIntyre that delves into the FBI's campaign against King. Basically, they weren't trying to kill them, but they were definitely trying to discredit him, destroy his reputation, silence his message.
It's crazy to think about J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. He hated King.
Oh, yeah, he despised him. He saw the civil rights movement as some kind of communist plot, and he viewed King as a dangerous subversive.
It's like his paranoia was off the charts.
Well, it was partly fueled by the Cold War anxieties of the time, but it also stemmed from a deep-seated racism and resistance to the social changes that King represented.
So he was determined to crush the movement by any means necessary.
Exactly. And he used the full force of the FBI to do it.
And the things they did are unbelievable. They tapped King's phones, bugged his hotel rooms, spread false rumors about him, even tried to blackmail him with recordings of his private life.
Can you imagine the pressure he must have been under?
I can't even imagine.
To have your every move scrutinized like that, to be constantly under surveillance, and then to have your personal life used against you, it's just awful.
It really is. But what's even more shocking is that Robert F. Kennedy, who was the Attorney General at the time, he actually authorized some of the surveillance.
Yeah, that's a tough one to wrap your head around.
I mean, Kennedy was a champion of civil rights, wasn't he?
He was, but he was also facing immense pressure from Hoover and others within the government who saw King as a threat. And to be fair, the full extent of the FBI's actions, especially the blackmail attempt, wasn't fully known at the time.
Still, it's a pretty dark chapter in American history.
It really is. And it shows how power can be abused even in a democracy.
And it makes you wonder about Trump's decision to declassify these files now. McIntyre suggests that it might be a way for Trump to expose the FBI's past sins and further discredit the agency, maybe even deflect from his own conflicts with them.
It's like history is repeating itself.
Yeah, it's this weird echo from the past. Trump, who's had his own battles with the FBI over the Russia investigation and all that, is now using their actions against MLK to potentially undermine them today.
It's a bold move for sure.
So what do you think we'll find in these files?
It's hard to say. Will they just confirm what we already know about the FBI's campaign against King, or will there be some completely unexpected revelations in there?
And what does it mean for the FBI now with all this going on?
They're already facing a potential crisis with these possible mass firings. How will this impact their ability to do their jobs effectively and maintain public trust?
It's a lot to think about.
It is. We're about to open up a Pandora's box here, and who knows what we'll find inside.
Only one way to find out. Let's dive in. Yeah, it really feels like we're at this point where nobody trusts anybody anymore.
It's true. We're seeing this rise in political polarization, misinformation, all these conspiracy theories. It's like nobody knows what to believe anymore.
And it's not just everyday people, right?
Right.
I mean, look at what's happening with the FBI.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this article from the Washington Post, and it's talking about how the acting deputy attorney general under Trump's orders is basically trying to get rid of any FBI agents who might have investigated Trump or his allies.
Oh, wow.
They're talking about hundreds of agents potentially being fired.
That's incredible. I mean, think about what that would do to the morale of the FBI. If you're an agent and you know that you could be fired just for doing your job, for investigating someone powerful, how can you possibly do your job effectively?
Right. You're going to be looking over your shoulder constantly.
Exactly. It creates this chilling effect. It undermines the whole idea of a fair and impartial justice system.
It's like a direct attack on the FBI's independence.
It is. And the FBI Agents Association, they're the ones who represent all the active and former FBI agents. They've been pretty vocal about this. They're saying that these firings would seriously weaken the Bureau's ability to investigate complex cases, especially things like terrorism and national security.
So it's like a double whammy, right?
Right.
You've got the FBI's past actions against MLK coming to light with these declassified files, and then you've got this potential purge happening from within.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster.
It really is. I mean, if the FBI can't function effectively, if they lose the public's trust, who's going to step in and fill that void?
Wait. It's a scary thought. I mean, who investigates corruption? Who enforces the law? Who protects us from threats if not the FBI?
I mean, I know this sounds dramatic, but it kind of feels like we're on the verge of something really bad happening.
I think you're right to be concerned. The FBI's campaign against MLK, it was a product of its time, for sure. But it also exposed a fundamental flaw within the agency. The susceptibility to political pressure, this willingness to target people based on their beliefs rather than their actions.
So how do we prevent that from happening again? I mean, we can't just erase the past.
No, but we can learn from it. And I think the declassification of these MLK files is a good starting point, but it can't stop there. We need a full investigation into the FBI's actions. We need to understand how and why they went so far beyond the bounds of acceptable behavior.
And then what happens after the investigation? I mean, is it enough to just acknowledge that these things happened?
No acknowledgement isn't enough. We need accountability. The people who were responsible for these abuses of power, even if they're no longer alive, they need to be named and held up as examples of what not to do. And we need systemic changes within the FBI to make sure this never happens again.
Like what kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, for starters, we need stronger oversight mechanisms to ensure that the FBI is operating within the law and that they're not being used as a political tool. We also need more transparency so that the public can hold them accountable.
Okay, I can see that.
And we need to cultivate a culture of ethics and integrity within the FBI itself, where agents are encouraged to speak out against wrongdoing and where the leadership is held to the highest standards of conduct.
It sounds like a huge undertaking.
It is, but it's absolutely necessary if we want to preserve the integrity of the FBI and make sure that it remains a force for good in our society.
But even if we manage to reform the FBI, does that really solve the problem? I mean, the FBI was a product of its time, right? The Cold War, fears the racism, the resistance to social change. Those were all part of the larger cultural landscape. And aren't we still dealing with those same issues today, just in different forms?
That's a really important point. Reforming the FBI is essential, but it's not enough on its own. We need to address the underlying societal issues that allowed these abuses to happen in the first place.
So we're talking about things like systemic racism, political polarization, the erosion of trust in institutions.
Exactly. These are deep-rooted problems that require a multifaceted approach. It's not just about passing laws or creating new policies. It's about changing hearts and minds, fostering a more inclusive and equitable society where everyone feels valued and respected.
But that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at how divided our country is right now.
Yeah. It is challenging, but it's absolutely necessary. We can't afford to just stay in our own little echo chambers and talk to people who already agree with us. We need to have these difficult conversations.
Yeah.
We need to try to bridge the divides and find common ground.
So how do we do that? How do we start to heal these divisions?
Well, it starts with listening. Really listening to people who have different perspectives than our own, trying to understand where they're coming from, and then sharing our own perspectives in a way that's respectful and constructive.
So it's about dialogue and empathy.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that we all have a stake in this. We all want to live in a society that's fair, just, and equitable. And the only way to get there is by working together.
Okay, so we've talked about the FBI. We talked about society as a whole. But what about MLK? I mean, he's the one who's really at the heart of this story. What do you think the impact of these declassified files will be on his legacy?
That's a tough question. We have to be prepared for the possibility that some of the information in those files might be damaging to King's reputation. The FBI spent years trying to dig up dirt on him, trying to paint him as a hypocrite, a philanderer, even a communist.
Yeah, there's that one file that McIntyre mentions that supposedly describes King witnessing a sexual assault and doing nothing to stop it.
Right. And if that's true, it's going to be really hard for some people to reconcile that with their image of King as this moral icon.
It's like that saying, never meet your heroes.
Yeah, King was a human being. He had flaws just like everyone else. But even if these files reveal some uncomfortable truths about him, it doesn't change the fact that he was an extraordinary leader who led a movement that changed the course of history.
He challenged the very foundations of American society.
He did. And his message of love, nonviolent social justice, it's still so relevant today, maybe even more so in these turbulent times. So yeah, we can acknowledge his flaws, but we can also recognize the immense impact he had on the fight for civil rights.
I guess it's about nuance,
Yeah.
right? Recognizing the complexity of history and understanding that people aren't one-dimensional.
Exactly. We need to be able to hold multiple truths at once. The FBI engaged in a reprehensible campaign to discredit King. King himself wasn't perfect, and yet his contributions to the fight for equality were monumental.
It's a lot to process, for sure.
It is. But that's what's so great about these deep dives, They allow us to explore these complex issues in a thoughtful and nuanced way, to challenge our assumptions, and to come away with a more comprehensive understanding of history and how it shapes the world we live in today.
Man, where do we even go from here? I mean, we've covered so much. The FBI going after MLK, all these files being declassified. What's happening with the FBI right now? It's a lot.
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming, right?
It does.
Like all this history is just weighing down on us.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that this isn't just some abstract thing,
Yeah.
This is all incredibly relevant to what's happening today.
You're right. It's like we're seeing the same patterns repeating themselves.
Yeah. Exactly. The FBI being used for political purposes, people being targeted for their beliefs, the public losing trust in institutions. This is all happening right now.
So what can we do? I mean, we can't change the past.
No, but we can learn from it. And I think one of the biggest lessons here is that we can't just sit back and assume that everything's going to be okay. We have to be vigilant. We have to hold our leaders accountable and demand transparency.
It's like that saying, power corrupts.
Right. And the fight for justice and equality, it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. The civil rights movement made incredible progress, but there's still so much work to be done.
Yeah, we see it every day. Systemic racism, social injustice, abuses of power. It's still happening all around us.
Which means we can't afford to be complacent. We have to stay engaged, stay informed, and get involved in our communities.
So what can we do as individuals? I mean, it feels like one person can't really make a difference.
I think that's a really common misconception, Every voice matters. Every action, no matter how small, it can contribute to positive change.
Okay, so like what? Give me some example.
Well, first of all, stay informed. Read about these issues. Learn about the history. Understand the different perspectives.
So don't just get your news from social media.
Right. Go deeper. Challenge your own assumptions and look for different sources of information.
What else?
Have conversations. Talk to people who have different views than you. Listen to what they have to say. Share your own perspective and try to find common ground.
That's hard these days, though, right? Feels like everyone's just stuck in their own echo chambers.
I know it's tough, but it's so important. We can't just talk to people who already agree with us. We have to break out of those echo chambers and have real dialogue, even if it's uncomfortable.
So stay informed. Have those tough conversations. What else can we do?
Support organizations that are working on the issues you care about. You can donate your time or money, volunteer your skills, or just spread the word about the work they're doing.
Yeah, there are so many great organizations out there doing amazing work.
There really are. And don't forget about the power of your vote. Participate in elections, do your research on the candidates, and support the people who represent your values.
Voting is important, but sometimes it feels like it doesn't really matter.
Your vote is one vote, but when millions of people vote, it can create real change. Never underestimate the power of collective action.
So it's about being informed, engaged, and active, using our voices, our votes, our choices to make a difference.
Exactly. And I think it's also about remembering that this isn't just about politics or social justice. It's about who we are as people. What kind of world do we want to live in? What values do we want to uphold? What kind of legacy do we want to leave for future generations?
Those are some big questions.
They are. But they're questions that we all need to be asking ourselves, and the answers start with each one of us.
Wow, that's a really powerful thought. I think that's a great place to wrap things up. It's been a heavy, deep dive, but I think it was important to have this conversation.
I agree. We've explored some dark parts of history, but I think we've also seen that there's hope for a better future.
A future where we learn from the past, where we hold our leaders accountable, and where we all work together to create a more just and equitable world.
A future where everyone has a chance to thrive.
I like the sound of that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic, ready to explore new ideas and challenge our assumptions. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world.